Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome back. Our guest today is the one and only Dr. Marc Faber, the editor of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report. Welcome back, Dr. Faber.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to your show.
Yeah, it's a huge pleasure having you on. Last time we spoke, gold was at a completely different price than it is right now. We're seeing a tremendous run this year on gold. What are your thoughts, Dr. Faber? What's happening? Is paper money dying? What's happening?
Well, I think some people, especially central banks that are non-US, are realizing that the dollar may be under pressure in future, either through expropriation, that reserves are taken away, or that the debt is not repaid, or that the currency continues to lose its value at an accelerating rate, in other words, through inflation. And so some people want to own physical gold because they think that in an emergency situation, it may be useful to have.
What about your thoughts on the tariffs right now? Do you think what Trump is doing is successful, not successful, good, bad?
I am very clear about this. I think the tariffs are a complete disaster for everything and everybody involved, not just foreigners or China. Or it would be difficult to say that anyone will benefit from tariffs, except maybe a few crony capitalists surrounding Trump that get an exception of this or that. But in general, for the American public, it's a disaster because it will increase the price of goods and services. So I have nothing good to say about the tariffs. And it's interesting that after 200 years of economic theory, starting, say, with Adam Smith,
hmm
The Wealth of Nations, we are reverting essentially to measures that were used in the Middle Ages at bridges and tunnels, and so forth, to 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 make trade more difficult and to collect taxes. A tariff is nothing else than a tax.
Yeah,
So when Trump goes and says, "Oh, I'm going to cut taxation," no, the tariffs are a tax.
right. Well, what's your biggest concern right now in the markets, other than everything that we see on the news? Is it bonds, treasuries? What's your biggest concern?
Well, I think that the economy, and I've maintained that for the last 6 months, was in a recession already. Now it's obvious that we have been in a recession in the first quarter, but it's probably worse than what they say it is. And my concern is that earnings will begin to disappoint. And my concern is that the valuations are much too high in the United States. I'm not saying that Hong Kong property stocks are expensive. Uh, there are always exceptions. And
Yeah.
also foreign markets tend to be cheaper than the US. But say the Magnificent Seven stocks in America are, in my opinion, grossly overvalued.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever think that it's a possibility with all this chaos and all the mess in the markets, that the dollar will lose so much value that we'll end up going back to a gold standard, or is that out of the question for the US?
No, I think it's a possibility. My view is that the dollar has far more downside risk than is perceived by the investing public. And therefore, in theory, the US could print money and keep the stock market up in nominal terms.
Right.
But if at the present the Fed prints money and cuts interest rates, I suppose that the dollar would weaken, and the dollar weakness could exceed the price gains on domestic on the stock market. In other words, you may make some money in US stocks, but you may lose it massively on the currency. I think that's
Right.
a possibility.
Welcome to the Cayman Islands, a premier offshore jurisdiction where natural beauty meets financial stability. Here, your wealth is more than secure. It thrives in one of the most trusted and respected financial centers in the world. For over a decade, SWP has been the trusted choice for precious metal investors worldwide. Our purpose-built 6,000 square foot facility sets a new standard precious metal storage. We are proud to be one of the only vault operators approved by the London Bullion Market Association. Beyond safeguarding your assets, we're committed to making a difference in our community by supporting local causes and events that reflect our values. As we continue to expand and innovate our services, we ensure that your wealth is safe and strategically positioned to shield you from the uncertainties that lie ahead. Strategic wealth preservation, trusted today and ready for tomorrow.
Right. So even if you gain something in the stock market, it's all nominal
Yes,
and it's going to be depreciated to the point where the gain,
yes.
yeah, they mean nothing.
I think in real terms, we've seen the top of the market in the US. I
For
call it the Trump top.
It's the Trump top. Do you think he's been talking about gold recently, even on his his social media account the past couple of weeks, he's been talking about how whoever owns the gold, holds all the cards or ha makes all the rules. What are your thoughts on Trump talking about gold? He's even talked on video about, the gold standard. Is it like, do you think it's viable? What is he doing with gold?
Well, I don't know. And my view about him is he doesn't know what he's talking about in 90% of the cases.
Right.
I'm sure someone in the administration suggested that maybe a solution to the problem is not the solution, but is temporary solution would be to revalue gold massively to say $10,000 an ounce.
Right.
But I don't see how the US would do it without first checking precisely whether they own any gold. That is a big question. How much gold does the US still own?
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about how they're going to audit the Fort Knox and how a lot of the gold there might be leased and it's not actually theirs. What would happen if they do a actual audit of Fort Knox and the supposed gold that's supposed to be there is not there or it's leased? What would that do to the market?
Don't be so kind. It's been stolen by the
Oh.
politicians. The Bushes have for sure taken some, and the Clintons.
So what happens if they do an audit and like what would it do to the gold prices, the market? Would people ultimately lose trust in anything that the US is saying? Like, oh, we have this many tons of gold. Really, it's not there. It's been stolen. What would happen?
Well, first of all, I don't think they will audit Fort Knox. Maybe
Right.
they know that it's not there, or whatever.
Right.
Uh, so my view would be there's significantly less gold at Fort Knox than they claim to have. And if the public, say tomorrow, you read in the Herald Tribune and in the Wall Street Journal and everywhere that Fort Knox has no gold, it's all gone. In my view, this would be disastrous for the US dollar.
Right.
And the price of gold, in my view, would go through the roof.
Hello, my fellow silver and gold stacker. I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching the channel. Subscribe, please like the video, and also hit the notification bell. Keep stacking. Like, how much more upside do you see gold having right now in 2025?
Yes, but it is impossible to say what is the value of something in a monetary inflationary period.
Right.
Because I can give you a speech now for, say, 20 minutes on why gold is grossly overvalued, because I compare it to, say, wheat, corn, soybeans. Or I could give you a speech and say that gold is grossly undervalued still when I consider how many individuals own gold, how much money there is in the world, the monetary quantity of all the countries, the debts of all the countries. So I can make both cases. And I cannot tell you whether gold is cheap or expensive. I can only tell you that, in my view, the ownership of gold is probably an asset that is relatively safe because it's not a liability of someone else.
Right. That makes sense.
You understand? If I
Yeah.
have a bank deposit or I buy a bond, someone owes me money.
Right.
But not if I keep gold and I store it in my garden or in any place in a safe deposit box, then I think that it's relatively safe. Not 100%, not 100%, because the government can declare it to be illegal. The
Right.
ownership of gold, they can declare is illegal.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Russia and China aggressively accumulating gold, do you think this could trigger a broader shift away from the US dollar and global reserves? Are they just trying to completely move away from that control?
The dollar as a reserve currency is finished anyway. The
Right.
question is today or in 10 years' time. But the days of the US dollar being a reserve currency, and maybe the whole financial system will change in the sense that they are no longer reserve currencies,
Right.
or that we move back to a gold standard or to a standard of cryptocurrencies, or I don't know. But I wouldn't bet that in 10 years' time the dollar is still a reserve currency. That I wouldn't bet.
Yeah. Like what political or geopolitical or environmental risks would even threaten the gold or silver supply? Like could a gold-backed cryptocurrency or BRICS trade agreement weaken the dollar's dominance?
Yes, or a war could weaken it,
Right.
or debt default.
Right.
So many things. All I can say is no paper currency has remained a reserve currency forever. The only reserve currency that has remained throughout history is gold, silver.
Right. Which makes
When you
sense.
look at it,
Yeah,
I
if you
mean,
look at
if you
history.
bought at the times of the Roman an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver, I'm not saying it was a good investment up to today, but you still have the ounce of gold and silver.
Right.
Whereas if you bought properties in Rome, the Vandals made sure that it doesn't exist anymore.
Well, yeah, that makes sense because, I mean, even if you're looking, every empire has to fall. If it's 200-year span or 250-year span, you look at the Romans, you look at the British Empire, you look at the Chinese Empire. Now we're hitting the 200-year mark for the U.S. Empire. Yeah, so like I wonder how that will look as the U.S. dollar defaults or you have a bank run. I just wonder how that would look. I think it will look like it'd be a catastrophic event for sure.
I suppose so. I also don't know how it looks because I've never seen it,
Right.
but I've seen bank runs in countries, or at least pictures of it.
And how would a bank run look in the US in this day and age? Like let's say at the end of this year you see a bank run. Will it collapse the stock market? Will it hurt the real estate commercial market? How would it look on that end, comparing it to
The
history?
Fed would make reserves available
Right.
that people would get some money,
Okay.
but they may not get 100 on 100. You know, it depends on the nature of the deposit. You may only get 50. In Cyprus, they closed the banks. They got 100,000, and everything above 100,000 was worthless.
Wow. That's scary.
Yes, it is scary.
Do you,
That's why when people say, they come to me and say, well, I'm very bearish about everything. I have all my money in cash. I tell them, cash may be the most dangerous thing to own. Because if you own a share in, say, I don't know, Triple M or in IBM or in Google, you own the ownership of a company. And usually that is not taken away from you, or it keeps some value unless the company goes bankrupt. But say I look at Germany, 1900 and today, there are lots of companies that existed in 1900 and the shares are still worth something. But cash was worthless 3 times.
right. No, that totally makes sense. And even if you're looking at like market psychology, if you look at the gold ETFs, now they hold more metal than most central banks. At what point does, speculative positioning itself become a systematic risk to the gold's safe haven status?
I don't know at what stage.
You don't know at what stage, eh?
My view is the more people own gold ETFs, the more people own gold, the safer gold will be, because it's politically for a government very difficult to take away something that is owned by everybody. You
Right,
understand?
right.
It's difficult to go in the US and tell people, well, now your properties, we, the government, are taking it over.
Yeah.
They can take it over indirectly by bankrupting the homeowners first. Then the homeowners have to sell it to companies like Blackstone and BlackRock.
Right.
And so the ownership shifts from the private sector to the government sector.
And that's terrifying if it switches to the government sector from the private sector.
Well, I mean, it's terrifying that the government could lock in people during COVID, but it happened.
Yeah.
Nobody thought it would be possible in a democracy, but it happened.
Yeah. It still feels like a crazy dream back in 2020. I'm happy people woke up or somewhat have woken up.
I'm not sure they woke up. I'm not sure.
You think they're still sleeping?
I think the next government or this government would tell people, well, you have to stay home for this and that reason.
Right.
They'll find an excuse.
And that's always more an excuse to have more control and more power over the people.
Yes.
Yeah. What would be your advice right now, Dr. Faber, for, the youth, the young person out there who's, struggling to save money and who's just getting into silver and gold? What would be your advice to them?
Well, my advice is always diversification. You need to own assets in, say, real estate, and you own assets in stocks and some cash and some precious metals. And don't overtrade. Don't speculate in gold, but acquire gold and silver and platinum as a store of value that you keep for emergencies, or you keep for your old age or whatever. But don't speculate in gold and silver in the futures market. Then you get a margin call, and you have to sell out at the wrong time. and you lose all your money. You understand?
Yeah.
I think people should get away from the view of get quick schemes, overnight wealth creation to long-term wealth creation.
Right. Diversification.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Faber, it's been such a huge pleasure having you come down and speaking to the community. It's really, I want to thank you so much. It's always a breath of fresh air, and it's been a very long time since I've had you on. So having you on right now has been a great pleasure. And as the market develops, I'd really love to have you back on in the future.
Okay, great. Thank
Talk.
you for having me. And I wish your viewers the best of luck or fortune. But I really think that the environment at the present time is not favorable for making money. People should think how to avoid major losses going forward.
Right.
In other words, you have to have some risk control, and you have to be patient and prudent. I'd be very prudent at the present time, because the more the government intervenes, the more difficult it is for the individual to understand what the government is, what the government's objectives are.
Right.
And Trump is an unpredictable character. He changes his mind all the time, and it makes life for investors rather difficult.
Yeah, because of the unpredictability, the uncertainty, and just that you don't know what they're doing next.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Take care, Dr. Faber. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Bye bye.
Take care.